It is my current goal to beat the game of Pokemon Yellow every single week in a solo challenge using every single entry, all 151 Pokemon within the Pokédex of the game Pokemon Yellow. But you'll notice that things look a little different. And that's because while that might be my main goal, every now and then, like I mentioned recently in the pinball video, I figured maybe we would change things up here and there. And in that same video, I asked people sort of, what kind of things would you be interested in seeing outside of the regular solo challenges? And there were a couple answers that were related to this game. So I thought about that, and recently for a different piece of content, I had to jump into this game. It kind of reminded me of why I liked it back when I played it. It's been a long time since I played this, I'll be honest. It's been closer to a year, I think, since the last time I played this game. But I figured, the people have asked about it. I've just been reintroduced to it, so maybe I'll record a quick little video in it. I did a couple of different runs. I had a couple that landed in not necessarily great ranges, usually just because of bad luck. I did have one that went poorly very quickly just because I made some poor choices that sometimes money management feels like you're being smart with it, and then you're not. Then you end up in a situation where you've only got one Pokemon and it can't take down anything in someone's team. So yeah, you do what you can. But in this particular case, I had what I think might be one of the most interesting things that's ever happened to me in this game. I don't know when they introduced the element that we're going to see today, but it certainly wasn't here when I first played it. So I was lucky that I was recording this particular one, and I thought, well, this is the one I'm making a video on, that's for sure. So we started off with what I think most games typically start off with, which is a starter Pokemon, right? And I chose Charmander. I mentioned it in a previous video, but Charmander was the very first Pokemon that I ever had as a starter when I played the game of Pokemon Red as a child. I saw him in the guide that kind of taught you about the game that came out before the game even hit the shelves, and I read that thing cover to cover as a kid. And I knew immediately, yeah, Charmander is going to be my guy. And he has been ever since. I've loved him very dearly for nearly 30 years at this point. And I know that some people are tired of him and Charizard and the Kanto, just sort of like over-glorification. But also, that's what I grew up with. That was my first Pokemon love, was Generation 1. And so it's always going to have a special place in my heart. Now, in terms of this particular video, I chose Charmander, like I said, and then I also still had some space to take some other Pokemon. I thought about trying to do this as a solo challenge, but this game is fairly hard. It's not insanely difficult, right? But I think for sure in a solo challenge, I don't know how easily one could do that, especially once you start getting into double battles. I don't know. I just don't think it's really possible. I could be totally wrong. Someone's probably done it. And then I'll eat my own words. But in this case, I figured I'm just going to play the game as it's intended, but I will do it, again, keeping it in line with my recent videos, or what the channel is currently, which is all Generation 1. We'll eventually dip our toes into some other generations, but for sure, we're starting with Gen 1, and so I also picked up Abra, and I picked up Onix. Now, my thought process was complicated. Even though I didn't spend a lot of time on that menu choosing, I really thought about what are some Pokemon that I'd never use, one of those which would be Onix. And then also I thought about the fact that I frequently wasn't using Abra, Kadabra, Alakazam in other games because the process to get one, I had friends, or I had a cable, I had a link, but it was always a lot of extra steps just to do a fun, casual run. So I typically didn't start with that Pokemon or use that Pokemon because, it just was extra steps and felt weird. But luckily here, it doesn't matter, right? Because in this game, you can just get an item that then lets him evolve the same way that you would use a stone for Eevee to get it to evolve to Jolteon or to Vaporeon, etc., etc. So I thought maybe we'll take a look at a Pokemon that I rarely get a chance to play with. And we'll actually have something pretty interesting too, because when you do a solo challenge with Abra, it only knows Teleport in the beginning. But in this game, it actually has Confusion to begin with, and I had fully forgotten, since like I said, it's been a while since I've played, this particular Abra actually has another move, which is Aura Sphere. That felt insane to me to see that. Like, I had fully forgotten that that was a thing for this particular Pokemon. I thought I was going to have to sort of kind of like a Magikarp, kind of level it up for a while behind the scenes until I could use it. But then lo and behold, it actually had a crazy different ability that came quite in handy, actually, even pretty early on. So that was a pretty fun element to this particular run as well. That's another great reason for this game to kind of be something that you maybe keep in your regular kind of rotation. It's just the fact that there is so much happening and changing, and every single Pokemon is available, and all the possibilities are available. It's just pretty fun. You know, I think you should definitely take another peek at it if you haven't played it in a while. And here's a great example as to why. Because sometimes you forget that your last round you got an egg that will then hatch into something like this. Just kind of a crazy little sidestep within this journey. Moving back along to everything, I'm obviously from now on, now that I've gotten my preamble out of the way, I'm mostly showing some of the kind of more influential moments within this particular run. In this situation, it's going to be the fact that in a moment, Onix will learn a special move, which will be Dragon Breath. It honestly, I really felt it was going to come up a lot more often. It didn't, but immediately following that, we are now going up against a level 15 Shroomish with a level 15 Charmander. And as you can see, the power that we're at right now, or the experience points rather that we're at right now, is pretty close. And so therefore we hit 16 and instantly Charmander gets to evolve. This is the first evolution on our current journey. So this feels kind of like a monumental moment. Felt like it was important to share. And honestly, again, Charmeleon, pretty great design. I know that, like I said at the beginning, I know people are pretty tired of the Charmander line, but I'm telling you, they really did something special with these three. Anyway, we then had a couple more random, just sort of like regular common eggs that also hatched. Just two quick ones. Got through the summary quickly, and then we moved on. Now we have, immediately following this, we have our next rival match. And this rival, sometimes you get lucky, right? Because think of how most of the games, they used to choose a starter that was super effective against yours, right? And in this game, it's just sort of a crapshoot. You don't know if it's going to be something of the same type, like we have here. You don't know if you're going to have something that you're weak against, or if you're going to be strong against. So, you know, depending on what you have come out first, can also obviously change that pathway up. There's no way to really kind of go, oh, in between matches, I'm going to change the order. It doesn't happen that way. And when you're in wild battles, they'll ask if you want to swap in between things. But here, there's no swap mode. This is set whenever you go up against an opponent, which is, I think, probably smart. But also it does mean that you're frequently getting enemies that you would definitely want to trade in during the middle of. So you're potentially taking, you know, bad damage coming in, and then it's just, I don't know, it just feels, it makes sense, right? That it is done the way that it is, but some of these fights can be very difficult with the lack of switch mode. That being said, the fact that we got a couple smoke screens off is probably the only reason that we actually beat Dondozo. We didn't have anything that was super effective against it, and we won't for a really long time. So, you know, that is a thing to kind of keep an eye on, but that's also a reason why this sort of challenge is pretty difficult when you're doing specifically like, I'm going to just play with Pokemon that either originate from this generation or however you want to look at that. But like, you know, looking at this game and saying, I'm just going to use Gen 1 Pokemon, it's a while before we come across a Pokemon that fits the bill, right? It's going to be a while. And we have a couple that I don't show in here. Like at one point we get another fire Pokemon. We get Vulpix. We see a Ninetales. We see a Pidgey at one point. And those are things that, yeah, I could capture them, but I didn't see them being beneficial. For Pidgey, it was because Charmander would eventually be fully evolved and then would have flying type moves. so it didn't really feel necessary. It would eat up some of the experience points, things like that. And then, like I said, also we already have Charmander, so we don't need Vulpix and or Ninetales. Now, in this situation, I feel like we kind of barely made by, but we did in fact make by. I do something that I think, again, is something that you should do when you're still pretty far away from the end of a round, effectively, of 10 levels. I took a look at Meteor Beam. I was actually pretty unfamiliar with that move. I don't even remember what game this probably came from, if any. I really don't remember this move being a thing. So that was kind of a thing that I kind of piqued my curiosity a little bit. I really thought about it, but I don't really love two-turn moves with the exception of moves like Dig or Fly, just because it means that you're skipping some of the damage. But in the end, I took another Experience Charm because that does help with everything leveling much faster. Now, we are skipping ahead to level 30, where we went up against Erica. This is going to be easy peasy. This will be just like watching a regular video for this channel every week, right? Here's me taking one Pokemon to the house. Every single Pokemon that she has is weak against Charmeleon, so shouldn't be that difficult to just rinse this team very quickly. Now, yes, Charmeleon does get a little low in HP, I'll admit it, but it doesn't matter. Like, look at that. We leveled up 3 times right there. That was a lot of experience that we got in one go. And luckily, we are then going to have some HP come back just in time. And even if we hit a level cap with Charmeleon, the shared experience still hits for everyone else. So I didn't feel the need to swap out here, especially because, again, it's just a Bellsprout. It's not going to be a lot of experience anyway. And therefore, with the Bellsprout down, we have moved on to the 4th set of rounds. We got more experience charms. Here is the first time where we found a Pokemon that I was like, yeah, I think it's time to try and capture something here. And I know I already have some ground typing with Onix, but considering I feel like Fairy type doesn't show up a lot, at least not in the early game, but I have felt like there's a lot of Fairy later on within the game. So I felt like having that poison typing could be quite helpful. I don't have anything with Steel. Onix has Gyro Ball. In fact, literally is learning it right now. That's wild. I did not plan that. I just knew that he learned it eventually. And he does, in fact, do it right there. Then we get to move on to a little bit later within this area. We go to level 40. Pinsir is a Gen 1 Pokemon. I don't have it in my Pokedex, so I hope that I don't insta-kill it, because you can do it sometimes. And I get it down to a catchable place. I throw an Ultra Ball, and bada bing, bada boom. Pinsir has joined the team lineup. Now, Pinsir doesn't have necessarily amazing moves immediately off rip. Just that's one of the downsides to catching a Pokemon sort of later in the run, is sometimes the moves are just really weird, kind of lacking in perhaps nuance is the word, I don't know. But he'll have some moves that are a little unfortunate. We'll get to that in a second. We do then have the next evolution. This one's exciting because there he is in all his glory. Charizard, everyone's least favorite reoccurring guest star of the Pokemon series. But he has evolved and has rounded out the team pretty nicely. It is one of those things where Charmander was not really a carry, but I think Charizard kind of is. Alakazam is also a pretty big carry as well, by the way. I know he evolved earlier. I didn't really talk much about it, but, Alakazam really is something that I really rarely get an opportunity to play with. So it was kind of fun to see him, although as much as he was sort of a carry in certain other parts of this game, this round was not one of them. And unfortunately, yeah, we didn't get it down to the first bar, so we took a pretty big hit here, and then Charizard goes down. It makes me a little concerned just sort of about what happens here. I really thought about just trying to go for the capture and then immediately releasing and just saying like, hey, I just want to have it as a possibility for later, but that I think ruins the sanctity of the challenge, so therefore we do defeat the Pokemon and we move forward. Now, When I said that we have like an unsettling kind of like learn set here, really Pinsir's actually not that bad from what I had remembered off the top of my head. There are other Pokemon that are considerably worse. I remember I one time got a, I think it happens way later, way after this, and another thing that, who knows, maybe we'll see if I put out more videos, but I at one point ended up with a Parasect that I was thinking, okay, this late in the game, it's probably got some strong moves, and it didn't. It had Slash, and that was it. Everything else was very unhelpful, so, you know, sometimes it's a real gamble. It's a real, I said it earlier in the beginning of the video, but it's a real crapshoot at times. And speaking of that, we have moved on to the next rival battle. These are always pretty difficult. I felt really confident here. I remember going into this battle thinking, okay, this will not be difficult for Charizard. We will be able to get right through. The Citrus Berry took me by surprise a little bit, and I should have stopped and preserved my boy. And I did not. And well, no, I did not pay the price. He paid the price. This was a choice and a half. I felt like I knew that if it outsped me, which I didn't think it would, but I figured if it outspeeds me, like, that's game over for Pinsir. But also I figured X-Scissor would be enough to take on the last bit. I also could have just sent out Onyx, but I did know that Unpheasant was in here, so I wanted to make sure that it was surviving. This was the thing that I feared the most, though, was Dondozo. I mentioned earlier that I didn't have an answer for it back then, and I still don't. This is one of those ones where we're going to have to fight tooth and nail to get something going. Luckily, even though Nidorino's moves aren't really all that great, I found a way to do something here, which was I got 2 levels of Toxic Spikes out, and I did a Venom Wave or Venom something. I've already forgotten what the name of that move is. But, you know, we helped lower its stats a little bit, which should help. There's a lot of sort of decision-making going in here of, okay, what's going to do the best for me? That's a move that supposedly always crits, but because it's not super effective or anything like that, obviously it still doesn't really make a big impact. Crazy enough, X-Scissor does. I really wasn't expecting that much damage out of a critical hit from that kind of move, but it really did the trick, and I could not believe that it held on after. Yeah, obviously it was a crit on the first one, right? The crit definitely mattered on that first hit, but the fact that it got it down to 1 health felt, I don't want to call it insulting, but it did feel a little bit like an insult. I wasn't expecting the swap in, so the Bug Bite move there was unfortunate. We did lose some important time there. I probably could have done an X-Scissor and then would have killed it there, but luckily we held on. We then take on the move of Swords Dance, which is truly an incredible combo with a Pokemon like Pinsir. Really wish I could use it more often. Really wish I could have used it more in this video, actually. But like I said, we're going to see some pretty wild stuff here in a moment. So, now that we have gotten through these next few Pokemon, I got a lot of these things down to like pretty low health, which meant that even though Pinsir was also pretty low health, with the exception of Goomy, everything else was easily one-tappable. And the crazy thing to me here is that I really thought about, do I just trade out? I just sort of went for it, and I'm glad I did, because Pinsir had the stuff. Pinsir had the moves. Dondozo was down to 1 health, gets poisoned. Even if I missed, that would have been it for Dondozo. And so therefore we have defeated the rival yet again, and we get to move on. Now, I don't take roleplay. I get to move on from all of these little expositions and all the little extra moves. We get something that is interesting, which I think is, I could have taken some Ultra Balls. I could take an Egg Voucher. I could take Tri-Attack, although I don't think Tri-Attack is really a great move for any of the Pokemon that I have on the team right now. It obviously has some interesting implications for potential moves that it could take. I thought about the Egg Voucher because I'm kind of always in the mindset of take the Egg Voucher, but in the end I took the Ultra Balls in case we could catch something helpful, especially for Dondozo, because I know we're going to deal with it again. Immediately after that, I find about a round or two after that, I think like 58 or 59, I get a trading link. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I played a little hard and loose, I know, with the definition of Gen 1. Technically, Steelix is a Gen 2 Pokemon, but I caught it as an Onix, or was using it as an Onix. So it was a Gen 1 Pokemon. It just evolved into a Gen 2. You know, maybe that kind of breaks the sanctity, but I didn't capture the Wo-Chien for, you know, just the ability to have it on the Pokedex, so I felt like maybe I deserved something nice. We then also get into a gym battle. I've kind of talked over part of it here, but honestly, this is another moment where we got lucky. They gave us another grass area and another grass gym, so therefore Charizard is able to basically clean house the same way that it did against Erica. Now, this one is a little more difficult. I mean, obviously, we're seeing some Pokemon that makes sense that these would be one-shot or very close to one-shot. But the big thing here is that there's a little bit more chip damage happening against Charizard. That outspeed there was not terrifying, but it did feel bad. And the fact that I barely survived that, I felt very fortunate. Charizard always doing right by me. This is a moment where, you know, it kind of makes or breaks the sweep, which is, can he do it? And the answer is yes. Luckily, we had already done some damage. Probably if we had not already gone up against Go-Goat, going in with 9 health probably would not have been enough, but luckily we had already sort of chipped away, so therefore very scary at the end, but obviously we had a whole bunch of other people on the team, so it's really not that scary. But you got to build it up, right? Anyway, we defeat level 60, and we move on from the jungle to the temple, a place I've never seen before, and then this happens. This woman says one of the most haunting things I've ever seen before, which is like, oh, I've seen everything that you are, everything, I've seen your futures, what you are now, what you have been, what you could be. And I tested what I thought seemed the safer route. And then something I've never seen in this game. It looks like they all evolve or something. They just become something else. And I didn't know what to do. That kind of shook me to my core a little bit. Not like in a, oh, it scared me way. That was it. That was the problem. I've never seen that happen in this game. And I didn't know what to do anymore. Because this was a Gen 1 run. And, well, simply put, my team is no longer Gen 1. So I hit save and quit and went back to the menu because that's kind of all I felt like I could do. My team was gone. My Gen 1 run ended in absolute catastrophe. And even if they were the same Pokemon they always were, or were they, or however it was worded, that was just kind of what it was. I may have played a little hard and loose with the Steelix situation, but there was no way I could, you know, do anything about this. I mean, this was just a step, or, you know, however many Pokedex entries there all away from each other in each situation, away from a thing that I could kind of stand by and still say, yeah, no, it's still the same thing. No. So this run ends in kind of catastrophe, in kind of some sort of psychological body horror type thing for Pokemon. I really don't know. But either way, even though it's not a victory, it certainly is interesting. And I hope that you enjoyed it. If you've made it this far and you've had a good time, please consider giving this video a like, a share, a little comment, maybe a little subscription, I don't know. But every time you do things like comment or like especially, it really helps out small-time creators, and I always appreciate when you do. And if you'd like to see more little side quests like this, feel free to hit me up in the comments. But until then, we will be back to our regularly scheduled programming later this week. This one was just so fresh and so interesting, I had to kind of drop it in immediately. But I will see you all very soon for another solo challenge in Pokemon Yellow.